counsel and also the senior policy advisor at the Department of Ag. I'm here on behalf of Commissioner Doran. And we'll talk a little bit about different responsibilities of weed control throughout the state. Let's keep a joke here first. It's about little Johnny. Little Johnny is in class, and teacher is on the front. The teacher said, "Well, anyway, for all you students, I want you to go home tonight, talk to your parents, and see if they can tell you a story that has a moral to the story, in a learning moment, something you can learn from that story that you can apply later on to other different things." And so all the students go back and talk to their parents. They come on back. Teacher is in front of the class and says, "Okay, so who's got a story? We talked to the parents last night. We talked to the parents and got a story with a moral." And little Johnny's in the back seat. "I got a story. I got a story." And does anybody other than little Johnny have a story? Sally, what's your story? "Well, teacher, I've got a story. We're egg producers. We're a family of egg producers. And we have a little chicken coop out back. And so what I did for 4 days straight, I would go out to the chicken coop and I would gather all the eggs and I collected them all, put them all together, so that when we went to the farmer's market, I could sell the eggs. What happened was I put them all into one basket, and then I put them on the front seat of the truck. And my dad, when he was going to the farmer's market with me, well, sure enough, we went over a bump. The basket fell over, and all the eggs got busted. So the teacher says, "Well, what's the moral to that story?" Well, my dad told me, "Don't put all your eggs in one basket." The teacher said, "Well, that's a nice moral to the story." Does anybody else have another story? Little Johnny said, "A story? I got a story." And little Johnny had a story. Well, then Nancy kind of immediately kind of raises her hand. "Teacher, I've got a story." "Oh, Nancy, what's your story?" Says, "Well, we're not really producers. We're chicken producers. Chicken producers. What my dad gave me was 2 dozen eggs. 2 dozen eggs, and I put them in the incubator. And for 21 days, every day I would count every one of those eggs, because that's how I knew that I was going to have many chicken, little bullets when they." Well, then what happened at the end of 21 days, I counted and only have 24 eggs and 2 dozen eggs left. So the other 6 didn't finish. Teacher says, "And what's the moral of the story?" Well, my dad says, "Don't count your chickens before they hatch." Teacher says, "Well, that's a wonderful, wonderful moral. That's a great story." And he says, "And does anybody else have a story?" And little Johnny's in the back. "A story? I got a story." Oh, so it's okay. Little Johnny, what's your story? "Well, teacher, this is about my Aunt Karen. My Aunt Karen was in the war. She was an engineer." Okay, the teacher was a little bit intrigued. "Well, go on." "Well, what happened was she was going over enemy territory, and she dropped, all the bombs and everything else. They were going through a lot of." Teachers kind of listening. Then all of a sudden they got hit. Every heat proving them there. So did my Aunt Karen. She went in to let everybody get off. And she decided she grabbed all that she could. She grabbed a M4 with 4 magazines, a bottle of whiskey, and then a machete, and she put that in her belt. And then she bailed out. Okay, what happened next? But then as she's parachuting down, she drank the whole bottle of whiskey. Her parents saw her. She's going into enemy territory. She learned in big enemy territory now. Soldiers were surrounding her. Okay, little Johnny, go on. What happened next? Well, she first took her M4. She took out the first 70 soldiers, shot them all until she ran out of ammunition, and then she took the machete out of her coat. And then I took out 120 soldiers. After that, She killed the last one with her bare hands. The teacher's like horrified, said, well, what's the moral of the story? Well, like my dad says, don't mess with Aunt Karen when she's been drinking. So, all right, well, let's talk a little bit about enforcement of weed control. And here's what ways presence of experts here. I recognize that. I mean, there have been weed control officers here in this room that have not been weed control officers for days, weeks, months, but years, but decades. And so I definitely appreciate that. So what I if at all possible, if you have any questions for the group, please ask the question. Here. Anything to share for the benefit of the group? Please share that information because there's nothing better than virtual experience, boots on the ground to tell a story like Little John. So let's talk a little bit about weed control enforcement. Weed control enforcement is first and foremost, whose responsibility is weed control? The landowner. Absolutely. Primary responsibility for weed control is the landowner, pure and simple. The landowner, with owning land, comes landowner rights. And that's beautiful. I love landowner rights. But also with land ownership comes responsibility. And one of those responsibilities is weed control. Simple purpose. Weed spread. If weeds did not spread, we wouldn't be having this seminar right now. There would be no need for weed control. People could have all the weeds they wanted on their own land, and nobody would care because that's that person's land. You want to devalue their property values? That could sell them. Except for the fact, not only do weeds spread, but they, as you all know, cause a lot of damage. They're yield killers. They grow quickly. They outcompete native grasses, native land, or native plants. They take away nutrients, sunlight, water, and they do that again, your own land, the landowner's land, but on other land as well. So weed control is necessarily to make sure that particular land on that particular section or quarter is taken care of because it's to prevent the spread of those seeds elsewhere. Because that's where it's for the common good. The common good is why we enforce weed control. Now, I'm not telling you anything that you don't already know, but here's the thing about it. Richard only gave me 4 slides. He said he kind of knows that lawyers like to talk. So he took like 10, 15 slides, whatever. He gave me 4. Here's the introductory slide, enforcement. Weed control, first and foremost, is inspection and notice the control. Notice control, the operative word is notice. You're putting the landowner on notice that they have to control weeds. And re-inspection. Very simple circle. If you do that, there's not going to be any problem at all with enforcement. We have, and I've looked at quite a few different laws regarding weed control about the different various states. And I can tell you this, if North Dakota doesn't have the best laws regarding weed control, as far as enforcement, we're among the best. Because I can tell you a lot of other states have exceedingly complicated and some enforcement procedures that make it sometimes almost impossible to enforce weed control. We have it very simplistic, step by step, and it works quite well. Now, the best way to do it is this, is two different laws that are very important. First is each person shall do all things to control the spread of noxious weeds. It's right in the law. That's right in the law. Each person. Person is defined not just as an individual like me, but as corporations, any type of landowner. Each person has the responsibility to control weeds. Here's the other thing too. No person may distribute, sell, or offer for sale within this state of noxious weeds. Full stop. That's straight in the law. You won't find that in a lot of other states' laws. These are very specific prohibitions. The other thing too is a violation of $100 for failure to abide by that and comply. But all the science, all the inspections, all the detections, all the laws, all the regulations really don't amount to a hill of beans unless landowner responsibilities to control weeds are enforced at the local level. Weed control, just like landowner, has the responsibility to control weeds. The responsibility for enforcement of weed control is at the local level. And this is by design. This is by design because you all know where the land is. You know the people. You know the owners. Now, I know there's a lot of vacant lots. There's absentee landlords and all this other stuff. But at the end of the day, it's at the local level, at the city level, and at the county level by design. Not only at the weed control officer level, but the weed control board or commission level, and then finally at the city commission or county commission level. So it's by design that as far as responsibility. Now, I'm not saying that it's inherent at the local level because the commissioner has also a great deal of responsibility as well, should things get a little bit out of hand. And he has the authority to do a quarantine. Now, that only happens usually only once in a blue moon. And the fact that quarantine happens only infrequently is really a testament to how effective weed control occurs at the local level. If weed control wasn't being done properly, trust me, there'd be a lot more quarantines. And quarantine is a whole nother process with locations and a whole bunch of different enforcement responsibilities and everything else. It's very burdensome, but it's also necessary in those very isolated circumstances. So he doesn't do it a lot because of the fact that it is being done effectively. Let's go to my second of four slides here. And what we have here, when Richard gave me this slide, I'm kind of going, "You gotta be kidding." I mean, how can anybody really understand what this slide even does? It looks convoluted, it looks disjointed, it looks extremely noisy and exceedingly visible. But actually, if you follow the arrows on the flow chart, it makes a lot of sense. This chart will give about 90%, of all the cases that you ever have to deal with by, again, following the arrows about where they've been. The easiest is you get a complaint, you go out and inspect. There's no noxious weeds. Close the complaint. Easiest by. It gets a little bit more complicated when you get a complaint. And just really as an aside, new law. The law used to say, weed control officers will investigate every signed complaint. It doesn't say that anymore. And here's the other thing too, is that the whole idea is to control weeds. So it doesn't matter if it's signed or not. We just deleted that from the law. Investigate all complaints because the whole idea is to control those weeds, those noxious weeds. And there's a lot of nasty weeds out there. So when when using your authority as a weed control officer, and this goes back to what my grandmother used to tell me a long, long time ago. And I never knew really what it meant when she was telling me that. But when she said that you can catch a lot more flies with honey than vinegar, first of all, I didn't know why anybody would want to catch flies, but I didn't know what that really meant. Well, that's kind of appropriate in the sense of being a weed control officer, in my view, because of the fact that we want to work with landowners. Landowners in North Dakota, as you're well aware, there's a lot of territoriality, a lot of pride in one's properties. Landowners are tied to the land, and so they take a lot of pride in it. And sometimes they don't like to be told what to do on their land. This is my land. Why does anybody care what I do on my land? Except for the fact of the common good and the fact that things that happen on their land can affect others. A person's landowner rights are fine, provided their land doesn't negatively or impact other person's land. So, in working to foster cooperation, it is best to hopefully handle things initially informally. And handling things informally is being helpful. Ronald Reagan, it might be one of the best presidents our country has ever had. Ronald Reagan used to say the 10 most frightening words in the English language is I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Well, as a weed control officer, effectively managing and enforcing weed control at a local level, you really want to be from the government and be there to help. And you do, and a person can do that through being informative, handling things informally, attempting to educate, inform, explain why these particular weeds have to be controlled and how to control them. So it's more than just sending out letters and and doing inspections and that kind of thing. You don't. It's not necessarily helpful to be viewed as the heavy hand of the government. Governments don't generally take instructions. Instead, fostering cooperation, trying to work with the landowner, and informing the landowner what needs to be done. Now, generally, landowners do know what noxious weeds are on their property, and they know that how to control them and everything else. But guess what? Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they weren't even aware of it until the complaint was made. Sometimes, they just want some assistance to explain, okay, I've got these weeds. How do I go about doing it? And that's where you deal with it informally. When you go out and get a complaint, and the complaints come far and wide, and you have to kind of sometimes screen out complaints so that every complaint has to be investigated with usually an on-site investigation. And when you do an investigation, this is what I'll leave you with. More is more. When doing an on-site investigation, the more detail, the more thoroughness, the more you can do to compile all the information about the on-site exhibit, the better. Not only to help that landowner initially, but should things come down to pass where other enforcement mechanisms might have to come into play, it's important to have already done the legwork so you are then able to properly enforce what you've already investigated. What I'm saying as far as investigation, take a look on the on-site. walk the land, walk the ground, take pictures, a lot of pictures, date stamp pictures. They're even sometimes better than samples. And when you do, have the date stamp so that there is no doubt that the weeds existed during a particular time. Then you can show and educate the landowner on what needs to be done. More is more. Write up the density, write up the composition, the actual infestations. Write it all up. The more detail, the better. Because you got to understand that it's not necessarily not the only audience, but also the landowner, and also maybe the city council, maybe the county commission, maybe the report on itself. What's exactly what's being done? You complaint who may or may not have an issue with their neighbor, maybe the council wants to find out exactly what has been done to control those weeds. So in any investigation, more is more. Then when you do the investigation, work informally, initially, at least, with the landowner to get a control. Don't have to send out any letters yet, but down the pike, you very well might have to, if informal methods are not working properly. All right, so let's move on to the next slide. Because again, you only have 4 slides. And we're already on slide number we're already on, well, first of all, before we go, does anybody have any questions at all about this flow chart? Yes, sir. They got on their Are you saying organic farmer or organic producer? Sure. That's an excellent question. That's an excellent. What do we do with people that say, I'm going to, I can't do any herbicide application. I can't do this, I can't do that. Why I'll lose my certification and everything else. 2 different choices. You go out and pluck the weeds yourself, go down the rows, physically do it, or you use herbicides. There is no exemption. I'll be very clear about this. There is absolutely no exemption under our weed control law in North Dakota for organic farmers if they get some income from the fact that they have a certification. But first and foremost, only about 1% of all the food produced in our country is organic farming. So it's a very small amount. But weed control is mandatory regardless of what type of crop production person is. Organic producers do not get a pass. Full stop. Yes, sir. Well, and that's fine if it's effective. If it's effective, perfect. If you go out on a reinspection and you still find the same weeds, then you take other enforcement mechanisms. Again, effectiveness is the key. Remember I was telling you about different laws in different states? This is another example of why North Dakota law is probably among the most effective in the nation. Weed control is mandatory for all landowners. Full stop. All right. Any other questions regarding the flow chart? Yes, sir. Highways and byways. Okay, well, if you're talking about the ditches. All right. You have people that say, why should we control our weeds? And they go. Well, the way land property works, as everybody recognizes, usually in those lands, there's an easement that the road is on. It's not, the government doesn't own that land. It's an easement. It's an easement, so the landowner actually owns up to the middle of that road, usually. As a result, the ditches are the responsibility of the landowner. Now they have to, sometimes if that's the case, you have to, if you're gonna do weed control, sometimes you you publish it in paper, and then a lot of other different things that you can do to provide notice and what's being done. But at the end of the day, yes, people have the responsibility, um, especially with weeds in the ditches. That's their responsibility. That's their limit.
With that, landowner needs to, is the fire people responsible for the weeds in the township road ditch. So landowner need a right of way exemption on their pesticide applicator's license. That is a right.
I agree. Yeah, no, I definitely agree. So I mean, the thing is that again, the fundamentals is very simple. Weed control is a landowner responsibility.
I'll answer that question only if there be common state. They need a right of way license.
Oh, all right.
That's the answer to it.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Like the national, how it goes on.
National Park. All right. I gotta tell you, okay, now I was with the federal government for 29 years, 1 month, and 19 days. I was in the U.S. military. Okay. So I got to tell you, I was part of the federal government, and then I retired from the military and started working for the state. There's nothing that hurts me more when the federal government doesn't do what the federal government's supposed to do. Some parks have no exemption; they still have the responsibility to stop to control weeds because again, those with adjacent landowners, what they do on their land can affect adjacent landowners and to run. Now, here's the rub there. It's a little bit different as far as the state enforcement capability over the fence. We can't take the federal government to court and tell them to control weeds on their land. It's a state court. But this is what the state of North Dakota can do. And what the state of North Dakota does on occasion. If the federal government is not doing what they should do, then we look to the court of public opinion, and we also look to impose, as necessary, political pressure. And I can tell you straight up, our Commissioner of Agriculture, and I can tell you this from personal experience, he doesn't have a problem writing very senior officials in the federal government when he sees something that's not right. I know because I've drafted some of those letters for his signature. So going back to what you were saying, what do you do for the federal government? You basically explain to them what needs to be done, and if there's no action, then we get people involved that have oversight over those national parks in order for them to do what is right. Because noxious weeds are not given the name noxious as a matter cavalierly, just as a matter of fun. They're noxious. They're leafy spurge. Everybody knows that's poisonous to livestock. It has to be controlled, otherwise, industries and landscapes and habitats and native plants and crops. I mean, it is very the reason why we all exist here is because weeds need to be controlled. So going back to what you were saying is that the pushback comes from asking them what they're doing, and then if they're not responsive, going up the federal chain so that they do what's right. That's no different from the state of North Dakota. Yes.
I don't own the right of way. Railroad or the fire. Right, I don't own that. How am I responsible for trees?
If you don't own it, you're not responsible.
How do we enforce
it? Against those people that do own it?
Yes. The railroad and the Forest Department Restoration. They don't take care of the license.
Well, the Department of Transportation does have the responsibility for weed control because that's in statute. And so you work through and you inform them, and if necessary, they can be just like weed control can be charged, so can a state agency be charged for weed control that isn't properly done. And that's by statute. How is it enforced? Methodically, straightforward. First, explain to what is happening, what's not being done, what needs to be done, and then what if it's not done by a certain time, we'll do it ourselves and we'll charge it. And the commissioner has that authority, state agency to state agency, and that's in statute. Railroads, you can go to the straight to BNSF. I mean, they're a private landowner like anything, like anybody else. Any other questions about this convoluted, disjointed, huge slide that Richard gave me that it took me about 45 minutes to an hour to try to get through?
Going back out right after we started, it's probably not going to be on for a long time. So how is that being thrown out? What's the, I'm not understanding.
Weed control first has to be effective. It can't be theoretical. It can't be way, way off in the distance as light at the end of the tunnel. When given, what weeds have to be controlled, they have to be controlled by a date certain. That's the beautiful thing that weed control officers can do, because we're going to come out. Here's the date certain, and I'm not going to come out on that before if the weeds are still there. You haven't instituted effective weed control. And the idea, I mean, I understand that people there is a growing market for organic foods because in the first market, we want to support it. First and foremost, weeds have to be controlled for the common good. And yes.
As long as they burn the top on, as long as you can see it, that's what it sounds like.
What I'm saying is, okay, one thing about weed control officers in the state of North Dakota law, you've got a lot of discretion. Now you work for obviously the city commission or the weed board or the city commission, the county commission, but you have a lot of discretion. As long as you can answer the mail and you satisfy the people that you work for, that's what local control is all about. If they can persuade you, okay, and you're comfortable with it, you can answer the mail to the board or to the sheriff. Oh, yeah, it's local control. However, with the understanding that things get out of control, well, then obviously, we have this. I should say, the commissioner has instituted quarantines in certain circumstances, infrequently, but in certain circumstances that's necessary. So you have a lot of discretion. Remember I was telling you about informally? We'll get to the next letter. Okay, because say that things have not worked informally. Say that you talk to the landowner. You have worked with the landowner. You've informed the landowner, and you've told all the landowner what the person has to do, explain to what needs have to be controlled and everything else. You go out for a reinspection, and sure enough, the weeds are still there. It's kind of strike one. You've tried your best to handle things informally. Now we have to go into the stage 2 process and work things a bit more formally. And that's where you write a letter, notice of control. I'm gonna put that up here because this is the third slide that Richard gave me here. This letter. This letter. This letter is pure weed control poetry. There's not a lot of letters that I've seen that are templates, that are samples, on which you can draw in order to inform a member of the public what has happened, what needs to happen, and what will certain remedial actions are taken. This letter does all of that. This letter is poetry. It is short, sweet, and to the point. It doesn't say anything that it doesn't need to say, and it says everything that it does need to say. Kind of reminds me of, I don't know, when I was about 6 years old, my dad took me fishing, and he got kind of tired of always putting another hook on my line or whatever. So he was teaching me how to put on a hook on a filament, and he told me to put the filament through the eyelet and then wrap it around 7 times. And then put it through another new thing. And then I asked my dad, I said, well, why do you why do you wrap it around 7 times? And he said, well, because 6 times is too few and 8 times is too many. That's what this letter is. This letter says everything that needs to be said and doesn't have any fluff in it about stuff that doesn't need to be said. All you got to do is fill in the blanks. No need to reinvent the wheel on this one. This letter is a good letter. And I heartily recommend that you work through it and not add personal flavor to it because, again, it's a good letter. How do I know? Well, I kind of helped draft it a long time ago, but that's another story. But it's a good letter. What it does is this. It basically says, you did an inspection. You found these weeds on there. You're required to treat these weeds by a date certain. And this is how you do it with mowing, spraying, herbicide formulations, etc. And then what you're doing is you're explaining if you don't do it, well, we teach you to do it. Here's why. If you don't do it, you might have to do it. We're not people the thing. The charges associated with this going to do, meaning the city or it's going to be then levied against your property taxes. All the expenses. And also, guess what? If things are really bad and we're dealing with a real stubborn landowner that doesn't want to do or doesn't want to fulfill landowner responsibilities, there can even be a fine associated with lack compliance with the weed control law. But we don't want to go that far. But we're just telling you that's the possibility. Oh, and by the way, too, we want to be fair about this as well, because we're also going to tell you that you can also place a hearing if you want. And then you can see the specific things that are wrong from weeds. Well, chances are at this point, hearing is going to be likely pro forma because the weed control officer has already done his or her job. It's taken a lot of pictures, taken a lot of did the investigation, looked at the infestation, told them what needs to be done and everything else. So the hearing can be actually pro forma, but they still have the right to it if they wish, because that's what's called due process. The whole idea here, if you look, noxious weeds, notice to control. The operative word there is notice, and that goes with due process. You're telling the landowner what the landowner's responsibilities are. So that's pretty much everything that needs to be told to this landowner that you've tried to work things informally with. Yes, Richard.
4 minutes.
You're kidding me.
You're right.
All right. So next and last slide. This is the 4-minute slide. Now, as you can see, I've kind of been rubbing a little bit over here because of the fact that I learned a little myself over the weekend. There's quite a fall on the sticks on Sunday morning. But you see, I've learned a few different things. And you raised 62 years on this earth. You know, number one, be nice to your knees. You'll want them and you'll need them when you're older. Next thing, never lick a steak knife. Okay, I'll tell you that as well. Another thing that I've learned in my life is never turn down a research. So these are all different things that I'm just passing on to you as well. But the one thing I also pass on to you is that when you're going up steps, the banister is there for a purpose. Trust me on that. Respect the ice. Okay? So these are different things that I've learned. Well, the last thing I learned is this. We hope we never get here. This is the fourth. Okay, this is the third string. This is the fourth slide. Again, the letter template is pure poetry. It says everything that needs to be said and doesn't say anything that doesn't need to be said. We hope we never get here. But if you do, if you've done all your legwork up to this point, enforcement is just pro forma. And at that point, the landowner has been on complete notice. The landowner knows exactly what they were supposed to have done. They didn't do it. And we have enforcement that says at this point, we are now going to do it ourselves. The state, not the state, should be the county or the state. And we're going to charge you for it. Now you can still request a hearing, okay, and delay things out a little bit. If you want to, if the landowner requests a hearing, do that very quickly because time is of the essence. The more time you let lag, the more time those seeds can spread. Palmer Amherst, perfect example. 250,000 seeds that can spread elsewhere. It can grow 2 or 3 inches a day. So the sooner that you get the hearing, the faster, the better it is for all people involved. As best as it can be for the common good. So if you ever get to the point where you're actually putting a letter of enforcement, there's a couple of different things. Make sure it's either personally delivered by the sheriff, or certified mail. Make sure that there's no issue with the proper notice. That the landowner is absolutely on notice what that landowner must do in order to then go with the appropriate penalties and cost of doing weed control by the city or the county. Weed control, the only way, and then if they do request a hearing, it goes to the county commission or the city commission. Well, that's pretty much the end of the road. You know, their decision's final. If they find to the point where they got to the county commission and they have a hearing, the county commission says, yes, we're going to do this. That's the end of the road. Now, doesn't mean that they can't sue. They can only sue for only really 2 different reasons. One is if they're not given proper notice, you know, or if that they acted arbitrarily and capricious, which is understandable. All that means is that the county we're imposing these requirements on you simply because we don't like you, and that's a pretty tough burden to meet. But the other one is if all the procedural steps have not been done according to statute, where the landowner has not been given the notice to control and the notice of enforcement. And there hasn't been working with the landowner all along the way. At which point, then that's an issue of due process. But weed control is entirely landowner responsibility. Yes, sir.
One of the things they've been struggling with is landowners want to do the right thing, but they're absentee landowner. And they have a renter, a farmer, who is farming, but it's the odd areas, the trees, the road right away, maybe a wetland. And he notifies the landowner that he needs to control weeds, but he lives in Idaho or California or Minnesota, and he wants to do the right thing. The weed board's contacted, you need to do this, and he says, I will, what should I do? And who can help him? And almost to the point where if you don't, we'll fine you, fine, go ahead and spray it and send me the bill. But because of the liability, weed boards don't necessarily want to enter private land to do that. We're only to a last resort. So then they refer them to a contractor list that there's no contractors on that list. So, the issue is weed control. We all want that, but how does an absentee landowner deal with it? And how do weed boards deal with, there's no solution for you, but you have to control your weed?
Well, here's the rub there. Absentee landowners are responsible for taxes. And I can tell you numerous cases where, as you're probably well aware, there's an absentee landowner, they want to do the right thing, and they're contracted out, and they leased out the land, and when they leased out the land, they said, you're responsible for weed control as well. That's what happened. Lessee did not properly handle the weed control. At the point, it still goes back to the landowner. Full stop. The landowner is ultimately responsible. What the landowner needs to do then is get another lessee, one that's more responsible and one that's not going to increase the landowner's year. Again, all goes back to the primary pearl today. Well, but it's using the when you're going down the heights. It's like you're going to stay away. The other thing too is landowners should probably try to get responsible lessees whenever they lease out their land. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
One more.
One more question.
The enforcement letter required to send out what you call a notice of control telling you that you may control it. The notice of control tells you that you may control it to the cost, that if you don't want us to control it, you're gonna feel it. So we still have to send them all different ways. It's basically going to do the same thing.
Yes. Yes, you want to send out both the notice of control and you also want to send out the notice of enforcement. And here's the other thing too. Again, it goes back to no requirement to do this at all for a weed control officer, but it's within the discretion of the weed control officer. You might want to send out a notice of control, and if you don't go out on inspection and it's not done properly for whatever reason, you might, if you believe it's appropriate, it might eventually result in effective weed control. You might not want to remedy that right away. You might still want to handle it and send out a second notice of control or a third notice of control if you believe it's going to be effective. That's up to the discretion of the weed control officer. There's a lot of discretion. All the idea is with the entire theme, you want proper weed control. And if it's of continuing to work with that landowner to achieve that, you give them the discretion with the idea that you still have to answer to the weed control board and ultimately the city or county commission. There's some discretion to try to work towards that weed control. So again, Happy New Year. I do wish you all well. So you all have a good day.
All right.